What if I told you that, back in 1970, there was already a hydrogen-powered car that produced no pollution, had an impressive range, and was completely forgotten by history? Sounds like science fiction, right? But it's real. And the craziest part? Almost no one talks about it. This car didn't need gas, it didn't emit smoke, it didn't make any noise. It was clean, silent, revolutionary, while the world was dealing with oil crises and just starting to worry about pollution. A safe and sustainable alternative was already being tested, and yet it vanished. What happened? Why was this innovation left behind? Who benefited from this car's failure? What you're about to see in this video will make you angry, suspicious, and leave you wondering if this story was buried on purpose because this hydrogen car had everything it needed to change the world, but it was sabotaged, silenced, forgotten, and that didn't happen by accident. Visionary engineers created a system that used hydrogen as fuel. The only thing that came out of the exhaust was water vapor. That's right, water. In tests from that era, this car reached a range of over 400 kilometers, with 1970s technology, yet you've never heard of it. No car company talks about it, and the media acts like it never happened. Why? In this video, you'll uncover the truth behind the forgotten hydrogen car of 1970, who tried to stop it, and what we can still learn from this silent failure. Because this story isn't just about the past, it's about the present, and maybe about our future. If you believe clean technologies can change the world, you need to see this all the way through. You'll understand why this technology was buried before it ever had the chance to change everything. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover here might completely change the way you see electric cars and the future of mobility. What I'm about to share with you isn't in the history books or in the commercials from big automakers, much less in the mainstream media. Back in the 70s, a hydrogen-powered car was built to challenge everything we thought we knew about transportation: zero pollution, high range, clean technology, at a time when the world wasn't even talking about sustainability. But this story didn't have a happy ending. This car had everything it needed to spark a new era, a quiet revolution. Eco-friendly, free from fossil fuels. But it was wiped out, and it wasn't by chance. The story of this car is filled with silence, sabotage, and shady interests. And the deeper you dig, the more it feels like someone worked hard to make sure it failed. Throughout this video, I'll show you evidence, documents, forgotten statements, records almost lost to time, but most importantly, I'll show you how this 1970 project connects directly to the challenges we're still facing today. Because even with all the tech we have now, we're still fighting the same battles: range, infrastructure, distrust, lobbying, and the old fear of change. Sound familiar? You'll realize that much of what hydrogen cars promised 50 years ago is what we're still chasing today. And when you hear that, you'll start to wonder, why didn't it work back then? Who was afraid of that technology? And why is it only coming back now? The answer is darker than it seems, because the reasons weren't technical, they weren't scientific, they were political, economic, and above all, corporate. Big companies, governments, and billion-dollar interests weren't ready to give up oil, or to share energy control with a solution that was so clean and so cheap. The 1970 hydrogen car threatened a system that still controls the global economy today. And now, with electric cars taking over the market, with Tesla leading the way, and hydrogen being discussed again, are we about to repeat the same mistakes? Are we once again going to ignore a promising technology just because it threatens those who profit from the chaos? This video is more than just a memory from the past. It's a warning. It's a revelation. You need to watch this until the very end, because this story was never told. It was hidden, and only now, with the right information, can we piece the puzzle together, see what was taken from us, and what we might still recover. You'll understand why this technology had the potential to change the world, and why it was buried before that could happen. You'll get to know the people who tried to save the project, and those who worked to destroy it. You'll hear accounts from people who were there. You'll see rare footage and data that was never aired on primetime TV. By the end of this video, you'll have a whole new perspective on hydrogen cars, on electric vehicles, and on the power struggle that decides what rolls through our streets. This isn't just a story about an old car. It's a story about choices, about power, and about the future that was denied to us. So don't leave the video. Don't skip a single part, because every second brings a new piece of this hidden story. And in the end, you'll understand how this story from the past can help us avoid the mistakes we're about to repeat. If you believe the world needs real solutions, that the truth must be told, and that it's long past time to break the cycle of sabotage and delay, then you need to watch every last second. Because this story will impact you, it will challenge you, and it might even inspire you. Stay with me. Let's go all the way. The 1970s, a time of change, uncertainty, and discovery. The world was going through its first major energy crisis. Oil, the foundation of the modern economy, was running low. Gas stations were empty. Cars lined up, drivers frustrated, and prices skyrocketing. It was a quiet chaos. A chaos that threatened to bring the world to a standstill. At the same time, in big cities, pollution had become impossible to ignore. The sky was gray, the air thick. Breathing had become an act of resistance. People were starting to realize progress came at a price that was far too high. It was in that setting that a few bold minds decided to look for another path. Among them, a young American, Roger E. Billings. A name few people know, but one that should be in the history books. Roger wasn't a lab genius. He was just an ordinary kid, but with an extraordinary obsession: to build a car that didn't rely on gasoline. Still in high school, he began working on a secret project. He wanted to transform a traditional car into one powered by hydrogen. Yes, that's right, a car running on the most abundant element in the universe, and with a single waste product, water vapor. Sounds like a movie plot? But he did it. At just 16 years old, Roger publicly unveiled his first working hydrogen car. It was an old Ford model, modified with a system that converted hydrogen into energy. He filled it up, started the engine, and took off driving. Just like that. While other cars spewed smoke and noise, Roger's car drove in silence, leaving only a trail of mist behind. People would stop and stare, confused. Wait, this car doesn't use gas? It's running on water. Later, Roger explained that technically the car didn't run on water, but on hydrogen extracted from water, a key detail, but still revolutionary. Meanwhile, other companies were experimenting too. General Motors was developing an experimental fuel cell vehicle. In Germany, BMW engineers were testing liquid hydrogen. Mazda was exploring rotary engines with alternative fuels. There was movement, there was hope. Many believed the future would run on hydrogen. Why not? It was clean, it was light, and it was everywhere. The timing seemed perfect. The planet was on high alert. The global energy system needed to change. The world demanded solutions. And the answer was right there. A fuel that didn't pollute. A technology that already existed. And cars that could run with zero emissions. Roger Billings' car was just the beginning. He even built a small hydrogen refueling network for testing. Gave lectures, appeared on TV shows, drew attention. But then, Everything cooled off. Suddenly, the project disappeared from the headlines. Companies shifted their focus, and the topic was gradually pushed aside. In the years that followed, the market turned its gaze back to combustion engines. Oil became king again, and hydrogen was shelved. Why? The answer is uncomfortable. In practice, there was nothing truly stopping hydrogen from moving forward. Yes, there were technical challenges, but they were solvable. The real problem was interest. The oil industry was too powerful, too influential, and far too dependent on the traditional model. Accepting hydrogen meant letting go of an empire, and no one wanted that. Besides, hydrogen couldn't be controlled in the same way. You couldn't charge royalties on something that exists freely in water, in the air, in the universe. It was a fuel that was too free, too simple, too revolutionary, and that's what made it so dangerous to the system's owners. Easier to bury the idea than to change the system. And so, little by little, the idea of the hydrogen car was erased from collective memory. Roger Billings' car became a museum. Peace. A science project that actually worked, but no one took seriously. And the world? It went on its way. Burning oil, polluting rivers, warming the planet. Decades went by, and only now, more than 50 years later, we're talking about hydrogen again. We're back. Too late? Maybe. But if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the best ideas don't always win right away. Sometimes they need to be rediscovered, rescued, and shown to a new generation. That's why you're hearing this now. Because you need to know that in 1970, the future was within reach, but we let it slip away. Or rather, they made us believe it wasn't possible. And maybe, now is the time to fix that mistake. The car was ready, it worked, it ran, it polluted less. It was the future, in the present. But that future never made it to the streets. Why? Simple. Because it made people uncomfortable. Too uncomfortable. It threatened those who profited from smoke. It disturbed those who thrived in chaos. It challenged those who wanted to keep the world tied to oil. At that time, the oil industry was the heart of the global economy. The entire world infrastructure revolved around it. Transportation, energy, politics, wars, everything. And then, along comes a kid with a car that doesn't use gasoline, doesn't make noise, doesn't pollute. Do you really think that would be accepted easily? Of course not. The threat was real, and the response was swift and silent. It started with discredit. This isn't viable. It's just a school experiment. It's unsafe. It's too expensive. Then came the technical excuses. There's no infrastructure. It's too hard to store hydrogen. The tanks are dangerous. But behind the justifications was fear. The fear of losing control. The fear of losing billions. The fear of watching the world change without the permission of those who run the game. So, what did they do? Simple. They cut funding, shut down research, and smothered the progress. Technical reports vanished, documents disappeared, investors walked away, some mysteriously, others quietly. Promising projects were canceled overnight, labs were shut down, researchers silenced. The media stayed quiet. No coverage, no headlines. It was as if hydrogen never existed, as if Roger Billings' car was just a myth. But it wasn't. It existed. It ran. It proved it worked. And still, it was forgotten, or rather, it was erased. Why? Because it was too revolutionary, too clean, and too free. Hydrogen can't be patented, can't be owned by a single company, can't be monopolized. And that is terrifying. Terrifying to those who profit from scarcity, from control, from dependence. Think about it. How many wars have been fought over oil? How many countries live because of it? Now imagine a fuel that can be made with water, that produces no pollution, and that exists throughout the entire universe. That's not an innovation. That's a threat to those who profit from crisis. So, the hydrogen-powered car was pushed aside, not because of technical failures, not because it was unfeasible, but because of interest, pure and simple. And the most infuriating part? It happened again. Decades later, in the 1990s, General Motors released the EV1, a promising electric car. Clean, quiet, and with solid range. And guess what? It was also taken off the streets, with no clear explanation. The cars were recalled, destroyed, and the contracts canceled. The few who knew about these projects started asking, is this just a coincidence, or is there a pattern? Does every real alternative that emerges get silently shut down, and who benefits from that? Meanwhile, car companies kept betting on combustion engines, governments kept subsidizing oil, and the world kept spinning the same way. But the truth is, we could be somewhere else right now, with cleaner cars, with less polluted cities, with less dependence on fossil fuels. But we're not, because there was a blockade, a silent blockade, organized and effective. And the saddest part? Most people never knew about it, never heard the full story, never heard of Roger Billings, never knew that in 1970, the future was within reach, and it was rejected, deliberately. That's why this story needs to be told, it needs to be remembered, and it needs to be shared, because the outrage you feel right now is valid, it's necessary. It's the first step toward questioning the system. This isn't a conspiracy theory. We're talking about facts, documents, evidence, silenced truths. And if it happened before, what's stopping it from happening again? Today, we see companies talking about hydrogen again. We see promises, prototypes, public tests. But will it really happen this time? Or will it be sabotaged again? That's the question we need to keep asking. Because if we don't understand what was done back then, we're going to repeat the same mistakes, fall into the same traps, and keep believing that we still don't have a solution. But we do. We've always had one. They just didn't let us use it. You already know that a hydrogen-powered car was built in the 70s, that it worked, that it was clean, and that it was ignored. But what you might not know yet is the most shocking detail of all, the part that makes this story even more absurd and harder to swallow, because that car was already doing, in 1970, what many modern electric vehicles are still struggling to achieve. Yes, that's right, the range of that car was astonishing. During tests with the hydrogen system, some measurements revealed truly impressive numbers. With just one tank, the car could go between 380 and 430 kilometers. No recharging, no emissions, no dependence on fossil fuels. We're talking about something almost identical to what Tesla offers today. Except this happened 5 decades ago. Hard to believe, I know, but the data is there. In a technical report published in 1973, Roger E. Billings detailed how his hydrogen fuel cell system was fine-tuned to achieve extremely high energy efficiency. The cell converted hydrogen into electricity, which powered the motor with remarkable stability. In practice, this meant the car could drive hundreds of kilometers on a single tank. No noise, no smoke, no engine overheating, no accelerated wear and tear. The system was simple, modular, and had great potential for industrial scaling. And here's the detail that destroys every counter-argument. Even with the limited resources of the time, without onboard computers, without cutting-edge sensors, that car was doing what 2024 models are still struggling to deliver consistently. What Roger built wasn't just an experiment. It was a functional, optimized prototype. And if it had been supported, if it had received the investment it deserved, it could have gone even further. We might have reached 600, 700, maybe even 800 kilometers of range back in the 80s, but they didn't let it happen. The shock only grows when we compare it directly. Today, in 2025, many electric vehicles on the market still offer ranges of 300 to 450 kilometers. A few models exceed 500, but they still struggle with slow charging, battery degradation, and poor infrastructure. And that car from 1970 was already driving over 400 kilometers with a hydrogen fuel cell, and it refueled in minutes, not hours. Now think, how many technological innovations here in the 21st century still haven't managed to deliver that level of efficiency with such simplicity? The answer is uncomfortable, because it forces us to acknowledge how far behind we are. It forces us to see that we were robbed of a legitimate breakthrough. And here comes another revelation. The hydrogen system developed by Roger Billings did not rely on the electrical grid. It could generate its own energy by splitting water molecules. Yes, energy independence. Something that today is the holy grail for automakers was already technically outlined in the 70s. He created hybrid models with hydrogen tanks connected to small generator units. And he was already exploring ways to integrate solar panels to power the conversion system. He was 50 years ahead of his time, and he was ignored. The patents Roger filed were consulted decades later by engineers working on today's hydrogen-powered vehicles. Coincidence? Maybe not. The truth is, everything was already there, right in front of us, and nobody cared. Automakers claimed hydrogen was dangerous, but they ignored safety tests showing stability in pressurized tanks. They said it was expensive, but refused to calculate costs at scale. They claimed there was no market, but they never asked people if they would prefer a clean car with high range and fast refueling. So here's the question. What if we had started there? Where would we be now? Maybe we wouldn't have giant, heavy battery cars. Maybe urban pollution would be much lower. Maybe the industry would have taken a different path. A cleaner, more accessible, more decentralized one. And that is terrifying. Because this story isn't just about a car with good range. It's about an opportunity. That was rejected. An innovation that was deemed dangerous. Not because of technical risks, but because of its liberating potential. Cars with 400 kilometers of range, refueled in minutes. No pollution, no noise. We're already ready in 1970. And the most painful part? We're here, in 2025, still trying to catch up to what had already been done. We're trying to reinvent something that was once ignored, out of convenience, out of greed, out of fear of losing control. What Roger Billings proved with his hydrogen car was that the impossible is possible, but only if they let it happen. His invention was silenced. But the fact remains, the hydrogen car from 1970 was already more efficient than many models today, and that should shock us, should infuriate us, and above all, should make us think. How many other technologies were buried? How many revolutions were delayed? And how many times has the future been blocked? By the owners of the present. Now that you know this, will you keep accepting the excuses, or will you start questioning everything? Because the biggest surprise is realizing that we were deceived, and that the real delay wasn't in the technology. It was in those who decided what the world could or couldn't use. Today, we're living through a new race for energy solutions. Climate crisis, fuel prices soaring, and growing pressure for sustainable alternatives. We're facing an urgent challenge. The planet is warming, the air is becoming unbreathable, and fossil fuels are slowly killing the world's stability. And in the midst of this crisis, an old name has returned to the conversation: hydrogen. Yes, that same technology that existed in the 70s, the one that was ignored, suppressed, forgotten, is now being rediscovered. Governments are investing, companies are testing, and hydrogen-powered prototypes are starting to appear in the headlines again. But the question no one wants to ask is, what if that technology had never been taken off the table? What if, instead of having to rediscover hydrogen, we had kept investing in it all along? Would the world look different today? Most likely, yes. Very different. Just imagine. If, since the 70s, we had been developing hydrogen vehicles, if car manufacturers had embraced that solution from the start, if governments had supported the creation of clean refueling infrastructure, today we could have cities free of pollution, public transportation fleets running with zero emissions, and an economy far less dependent on oil. But that's not what happened. We lost time, decades of delay, billions of tons of CO2 released into the atmosphere, while the answer was within our reach all along. Now, we're trying to catch up. Companies like Toyota, Hyundai, and BMW have already released hydrogen-powered models, but they're expensive, hard to refuel, and still limited to a handful of countries. Tesla, the symbol of the modern electric revolution, still hasn't seriously invested in hydrogen. Elon Musk once said fuel cells are fool cells. But are they really? Or is that just another example of how business interests shape the narrative? Because the truth is simple. Hydrogen is competitive. It's powerful. It's clean. But it's not as controllable as a network of chargers. It doesn't allow for the same kind of centralized control. And maybe that's why it still faces so much resistance. Meanwhile, battery. Electric vehicles have taken over the market. Are they good? Yes. Are they efficient? Also, yes. But they have problems. Mass battery production consumes massive amounts of natural resources. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, all extracted with severe environmental impact. And let's not even talk about disposal, still unsolved. Beyond that, the energy used to charge these cars isn't always clean. In many countries, it still comes from coal or natural gas. So the car is clean, but the energy feeding, not so much. And that brings us back to hydrogen. A fuel cell can be powered by green hydrogen, generated from renewable sources like solar or wind. The process is clean from beginning to end. The only thing that comes out of the tailpipe? Water vapor. That changes everything. The real question is, why are we only now taking this option seriously? If we already knew it was possible back in 1970, if we already had prototypes with over 400 kilometers of range, why is the conversation only gaining momentum now? That's the reflection. Were we deceived? Was history distorted? Did economic interest delay progress? Yet again. It seems so. And now, we're paying the price. We pay with the quality of our air, with traffic-jammed, polluted cities, with a planet crying out for help. We're at the limit, and the truth is, if we had made the right choices in the past, we might not be living this crisis in the present. But is there still time? Yes. Hydrogen is here. Available. Technologically viable. And with investment, it can become accessible. The infrastructure is still a challenge, but the world has enough experience now to overcome it. And technology has come a long way. Safer tanks, more efficient production methods, green hydrogen plants being built in many countries. What's missing now? Courage, political will, and above all, memory. We need to remember that this solution already existed, and it was pushed aside. And now that it's back, we can't make the same mistakes again. We can't let another revolution be silenced, another opportunity ignored. The connection to the present is clear. The past showed us the way, but it also showed us the obstacles that still exist. Corporate interests, misinformation, market control, and a public that often doesn't know the truth. But now you do. You know that in 1970, a technology capable of changing everything existed. and it was abandoned. You know that today, with all the advances we have, it's possible to restart this journey with even greater strength. And you know that if we keep ignoring viable alternatives, the cost will be enormous, far higher than any infrastructure investment. Because the cost will be the future itself. That's why this story needs to be told, needs to be discussed, and needs to serve as a warning, so that the next decisions are made with awareness, with truth, and with the courage of those who refuse to repeat the mistakes of the past. Now that you know the story of the 1970 hydrogen car, you might be wondering, was this just an isolated case? Just a failed experiment? The answer is no. That car was just one among many. Many projects, many attempts, many brilliant ideas that were silenced, erased from collective memory. The industry had many chances to change, but it chose to stay on the more profitable path, even if that path was more polluting, more expensive, and less sustainable. And believe me, this didn't just happen in the 70s. In 1990, a Japanese automaker went even further. They didn't just create a functional hydrogen-powered car, they put it into production. Yes, actual production. Units were manufactured, tested, showcased at international expos. And for a brief moment, it looked like the world was finally going to change direction. But guess what happened? Yes, once again, the story repeated itself. The project was shelved, sales were suspended, the cars vanished. And today, very few people even know this happened. But you will, because in the next video, we're going to talk about that Japanese car, a revolutionary model that could have placed Japan years ahead of the rest of the world, but was sabotaged before it even had a chance to live. If you thought the 1970 hydrogen car story was shocking, just wait until you hear this one. It involves international deals, industrial lobbying, and a strategic decision that reshaped the future of automotive technology. So don't leave without clicking. Click here to learn about the hydrogen car from the 90s. That was ready to change the world, but was silenced. Because this story isn't over. It's just getting started, and there's still so much more that they don't want you to find out.